Welcome back to the Haunted Hour, where we dive into the unsettling, the mysterious, and the downright chilling. Tonight, we have 3 terrifying true stories about people who found themselves completely alone at work. Or at least, they thought they were. But these stories will make you think twice about working after hours. Prepare yourself, because these are not your average creepy tales. Grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and let's get started with our first story. Story 1. The Disappearing Co-Worker. It was an ordinary Wednesday night, and Sarah was hard at work, trying to meet a deadline that was quickly approaching. The building she worked in was an old office complex with long corridors and rooms full of cubicles. Most of her colleagues had left for the day, and the place felt deserted, except for a few of them who stayed late to finish up their tasks. The fluorescent lights above flickered as Sarah's computer screen cast an eerie glow on her face. She was just about done with the presentation when she heard something. Footsteps. At first, she thought it was someone walking past her cubicle, but when she glanced up, the hallway was empty. No one was around. The sound of the footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. She shrugged it off, thinking it was just her imagination, and went back to typing. But then it happened again. More footsteps, this time closer, and closer still. Sarah stood up, curiosity piqued. She peeked out of her cubicle, looking down the hallway, but once again, no one was in sight. The sound of footsteps continued, getting louder and louder, as though someone was walking right behind her. She felt a chill run down her spine and quickly returned to her desk, her heart pounding in her chest. After a few moments, the footsteps ceased, but the atmosphere had changed. It felt different now, like she wasn't really alone. As she began to gather her things, ready to leave for the night, her phone suddenly rang. It was her manager. "Sarah, are you still at the office?" her manager asked in a strange tone. "Yeah, I'm just finishing up," Sarah replied, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in her stomach. "I'm the only one here." "No." Her manager's voice suddenly sounded more urgent. "I locked up hours ago. Everyone is gone." "Are you sure you're still in the office?" Sarah felt her stomach drop. "But I'm in the office. I'm sitting at my desk. No one's here," she said, her voice trembling. Her manager didn't reply immediately. Then came the last thing Sarah expected to hear. "Check the back hallway, Sarah. The door was locked. It couldn't have been anyone else." Sarah hung up and slowly stood up, feeling as if the air had thickened around her. She walked cautiously to the back hallway. There, in the dim light, she could see the door at the end of the hall ajar, as if it had been recently opened. She stepped forward, her shoes clicking against the cold tiles, the sound echoing through the building. As she approached the door, something moved in the corner of her eye, a shadow darting out of sight. She froze. "Hello," she called out. No answer. In a panic, she rushed to the door, only to find it wide open. And there, in the empty hallway, there was no sign of anyone at all. The strange thing was, she could have sworn she heard someone whispering her name, softly at first, then louder and more insistent. She turned back to her desk, her heart racing. Everything felt wrong. It was then that she noticed the security cameras above her desk, blinking. They were running. But when Sarah checked the footage later that night, it was completely blank. The hours had been wiped clean from the system. Only one frame remained, a blurry, shadowy figure that seemed to be standing right behind her at her desk. Story 2. The Phantom Voice. James had been working late nights at a tech company for a while. The office building, though modern, had an unsettling atmosphere late at night. the kind of place where the silence was almost oppressive, and every little creak of the building seemed to make your skin crawl. The sound of the air conditioning humming, the occasional flicker of fluorescent lights, everything felt eerie after hours. He had grown used to it though, or so he thought. One night, James was the last person left in the building, finishing up an important project. The rest of his colleagues had long since left, and the building was eerily quiet. The only sounds were his typing and the quiet hum of his computer. But as the night dragged on, something strange started to happen. He began to hear what sounded like faint whispers, soft, unintelligible words, coming from somewhere in the building. He turned his head, expecting to see someone, but the hallway outside his office was empty. It happened again. This time he thought he heard someone call his name. James. This time, the voice was much clearer. It was like someone was standing right behind him, whispering his name, breath hot against his ear. He spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He grabbed his phone and dialed his colleague's number, but there was no answer. His mind was racing. What was going on? Feeling increasingly unnerved, James decided to check the security footage of the building, just to calm his nerves. He clicked through the different camera angles, his hands trembling. But as he looked through the footage, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The footage from earlier that night was completely gone. It was all wiped clean. But the strangest part, the last thing he saw before the footage vanished was a shadowy figure standing in the doorway of his office, watching him. Story 3. The Locked Room. Lauren had always been a night owl, and she didn't mind staying late at the office. The building she worked in was small, tucked away on a quiet street. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest office space with an old-fashioned feel to it. The kind of place where time seemed to stand still once the lights dimmed. She liked the peace and quiet of late-night work sessions. It helped her concentrate. But on one particular night, things didn't feel quite right. Lauren was finishing up some paperwork when she noticed that one of the office doors was locked. It was a door she was sure she hadn't locked herself. It led to a small supply closet, and no one had been inside for hours. Frowning, she tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She assumed someone had locked it by mistake and decided to call maintenance. But when the maintenance worker arrived, he tried to open the door and found the same thing. Locked tight, as if it had been sealed for good. No one else had keys to that door, and it was an odd occurrence. "We'll have to wait until tomorrow to fix this," the worker said, shrugging. Lauren didn't think much more of it, but as she turned to leave for the night, she heard something. A faint sound, almost like a breath. She froze, her hand hovering over the door handle. The breath sounded closer now, like someone was standing right behind her. She quickly spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. But the office was still empty. No one was there. Nervously, she made her way to her car, but when she returned to grab something from her desk, she noticed something chilling. The supply closet door was now wide open, and inside, there was nothing unusual, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt thicker, as if something was watching her. Later that night, she noticed something on her desk, a small folded note. It read, "You shouldn't have left." That was the last straw. Lauren packed her things and rushed out of the building. As she left, she looked back at the open supply closet door, hearing the faint sound of breathing again. But this time, she didn't look back. These stories remind us that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what we see, but what we don't. When we're alone in a space, our minds can play tricks on us, but sometimes there's something much darker lurking in the shadows. Have you ever experienced something creepy at work? Let us know in the comments. And as always, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true horror stories. Until next time, stay safe and remember, never be too comfortable when you're alone at work.